I'm Sam Bushman.
And Danny Morrison.
And this is Candid Gaming's review of Thexder Neo for the PlayStation Network. Thexder Neo is a side-scrolling platformer that puts the player in the role of a giant mechanized robot who invades an enemy base with the intent of destroying its core. Where things get interesting, however, is how the developers managed to strike a balance between a self-destructive attack system and unique enemy placement. And this was something that stood out as a huge bright spot for me in this game. The way that the attack system drains your health as a means of fueling your attack. This automatic homing laser. It just really kind of said, you have to think about each of your attacks.
Yes, I thought that was a very good part about this game. You had this whole decision-making on anything. While you could kill just about anything you've seen, killing it could go ahead and hurt you, and it did, every time.
Exactly. And there are even moments where you sit there with little health and you'd think, do I attack him? Do I just simply dodge and evade? It really made you think about every decision.
Then you had the shield, which went ahead and took 10 energy every time you used it, but it was making you invulnerable.
Yeah, and then to top it off, you got a bonus for not using it. It was this constant roulette spin of, do I attack? Do I evade? Do I pop my shield? It really made every level that much more interesting.
The music in this game was excellent. It had this great forward momentum.
I know exactly what you're talking about. I hit low points in the level where there weren't very many enemies, but I always had that music reminding me that I had to push on, get to the end. It was always really energizing for me.
The music was very unique to the parts. You got this great intro, you're just kind of getting into the game. It's nice, tappy, it's nice, fast, keeps a good beat to it. Then you get deeper in there into these cave areas. It's dark, it's eerie. Then you just delve in deeper. In the deeper areas, it's more of a computer again, and it kind of feels like you're getting into the core of some kind of big boss. And then you get to the boss.
Another thing that really stood the levels apart, too, was how the enemies were placed. Anytime you encountered a new level, the level designers found a new and interesting way to place each of the enemies and provide these puzzles for you. And the puzzles weren't just the types of enemies and types of projectiles they shot, but also how you had to go back to the attack system and figure out how do I approach these enemies and attack them, which ones drop health. It led to more of this choice I was talking about earlier, but then themed it in each of the worlds. It really just took that main gameplay component and wove it into every portion of the game.
Yeah, that was one thing that was very interesting about it, is that some characters you had to go ahead and guess, is he going to drop health from me? Because some of these people are very meaty but don't drop anything, while other ones are worthy to kill.
Yeah, there were even points where I just outright avoided large groups of enemies because I knew they would just soak up my energy.
Beyond the music, I really didn't find many redeeming qualities in Thexder Neo. It really is an identical port to the game from 1985.
Now see, I think you're wrong in that regard, because there's, if nothing else, one huge difference between the remake and the original is the difficulty. And this was something I thought was really charming about the game, because the remake introduces an easy and normal mode, but then the remake is substantially more difficult than even the normal mode, which almost gives you a hard mode. And the mechanics play a little stiffer, the enemies are a little harder, and it overall gives you a tougher time to get through it. And actually on the subject of the classic, I also enjoyed the fact they even included it. By including the classic, it kind of gives you a history of Thexder. What was it like in 1985? How did it play? And allowing the players to make such a comparison really, for me, upped the value of the game.
But that's just it. It's the same game, but it's easier. It just kind of comes off as feeling cheap.
Cheap? I mean, Dan, when you play through the first couple levels, it's extremely difficult. I mean, yeah, you gotta introduce the player to how the mechanics work, and which enemies give health and which don't, but it's extremely challenging.
But that's the difference. When in the original and in the normal mode, you have one continue to play through the entire game. In easy mode, they introduce it that you have unlimited continues for each level you progress through the game.
Right, but it's easy mode. That's the whole point. You can get a novice player in there who doesn't play arcade and action games normally and give them an opportunity to learn the game.
But once you've mastered it, it kind of gets that whole thing that the game doesn't throw anything new at you. It kind of becomes repetitious.
Now see, I disagree with that. The first couple levels are very rudimentary. It's a big introduction. But then after that, they introduce things like lava pit hazards, maze levels, and even having enemies drop from above you and attempt to kill you. I think it really mixes it up. I can see what you're saying to a point, however. At least when you play through the game initially. Because after that point, you play through all the levels again, you don't lose any of the energy you've accrued over the course of the game, and it's essentially saying now you can start the game again, but you're absolutely maxed out in stats, beyond belief. The game just becomes an absolute cakewalk.
Yeah. The remake only has 10 levels. And in those 10 levels, it takes about a half hour to beat through. This game has a very short lifespan.
I suppose I could see that. I mean, I agree. 10 levels isn't very long.
Once you've mastered the gameplay in this game, it offers very little to you. Because once you go through the motions, it's that you basically kind of get to the mastery of how you go ahead and play through the game, and it's over.
Now, see, I can see where you're coming from, and it actually ends up becoming one of the big weaknesses of the game. For its innovative gameplay and the way it sets up the single player, after you beat those first 10 levels, there's nothing else, including even the multiplayer. I was expecting a lot walking into that. You and I joined up, started playing, and thought it was just like a glorified version of catch the flag and run to the end.
Now, the multiplayer was semi-redeeming. I kind of enjoy speedruns, and this is kind of cool that they kind of included this whole thing that not only is it a speedrun, but it's also a flag capture, and then you're racing against your teammates. But the problem is that the levels themselves are different than the actual single player. They omit like characters and stuff. That was one thing that bothered me.
Right. That, and honestly, just going to get the flags wasn't enough motivation to make me explore these levels in multiplayer. If they could have provided power-ups, or maybe some sort of hazards you could trip against another player, some reason to make you want to explore besides finding the flag, it seemed like a very just basic, and I have to do this kind of objective, and that's something I want to do.
The multiplayer also didn't have a local multiplayer, which meant that both of your friends would have to buy a copy if you wanted to play with each other, and it's still a very non-interactive multiplayer, I guess.
Yeah, that was a really strange decision on their part. The multiplayer is simple enough. I don't see why it required online play.
Yeah, they don't even interact with each other. Basically, you're a ghost. So it's just more like a speedrun that you're playing against your buddies. So it really seems like something that it would be better to have it locally if it was even a feature. Even then, I can understand that many people probably wouldn't even care.
Yeah, overall, at least add some traps or power, some way to interact with the other guy.
Which kind of comes to the whole thing. This game has very, very limited replay value.
I guess I can see what you're talking about there. After you beat level 10, there really isn't a whole lot to do. It just loops the game over. And in fact, after you beat it, you maintain your max amount of energy, and the difficulty drops off. So, yeah, the difficulty curve does kind of get thrown out the window at that point. It becomes extremely easy to breeze through all the levels. The challenges have all been reduced because they've been balanced, expecting you to build up your energy throughout the game.
That's why I think this game overall is only worth probably about $5.
$5?
Yeah. Now, this is where it's kind of conflicting. It may be worth to some people 10, but it really kind of comes to the people. This game has no story. It has about 10 levels in the real remake game, and then you have the original game included with it, but it's still not a very redeeming. There's very little replay value. It's really a hardcore platformer. If you really like platformers that have a unique gameplay to it, you might enjoy it. But it really kind of puts it off itself into a niche that is very hard to recommend to just mainstream.
Now, see, maybe I fall in that category then, because for me, I really enjoyed their experiment with essentially taking a very simple, very stripped-down gameplay mechanic and weave it into the entire game, into all the levels, into all the enemies, made it all about that energy bar. And just to study it alone, I thought was absolutely interesting. It really showed off how can you use level design to vary up something that's otherwise extremely simple. And because of that, I think it's worth $15. $10 to me was a deal for this game because it was such a unique experience.
I think it just ended so short. You really kind of get, as soon as you get into the field, it's over.
It did have its flaws, but I think they're overridden by just the uniqueness of it and all the positive points I've stated. Thanks for watching our review. As usual, leave any comments that you have either at the bottom of the YouTube page or the bottom of the Why So Blue page. And stay tuned because next time we'll be reviewing Hustle Kings for the PlayStation Network.